Okay, let's unpack this.
And we are definitely wading into sacred waters today.
We really are.
This is a deep dive that, it requires us to look at a true legend through a highly critical lens, but it's a necessary conversation to have.
It is. We're diving headfirst into Bruce Lee's final completed film, Enter the Dragon. And look, there's absolutely no question about its cultural footprint. It's the definition of iconic.
Oh, without a doubt.
I mean, 45 years on, if I say martial arts cinema, you can instantly picture it. That single enduring shot of Lee, poised, ready for that final showdown.
With the 3 bloody scratches across his chest.
Exactly. Those 3 sort of aesthetically perfect, bloody claw scratches. That is a pop culture flashpoint, defined a generation.
It absolutely did, and we have to start by grounding ourselves in its history, because that historical context is, it's the shield against a lot of this criticism.
Right.
Enter the Dragon premiered at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood, August 24, 1973. And this was, it was so much more than a movie premiere. It was a societal event.
It was a moment.
A huge moment. It was a Hollywood co-production with an Asian lead headlining the bill. I mean, that was a revolutionary concept in Western mainstream cinema at that time.
Almost unheard of.
It basically took the martial arts genre, which had been, pushed to the grindhouse circuits and midnight showings, and it just blasted it onto the global A-list stage.
Okay. So, landmark status, established, global impact, completely undeniable. But here's the provocation we're here to discuss. The central controversial argument.
Here it comes.
If we strip away that thick layer of nostalgia and the undeniable power of Bruce Lee's charisma, is Enter the Dragon actually a structurally good movie? Or is it, as an increasing number of critics and martial arts purists argue, the single most overrated kung fu movie ever produced?
And that is our mission. We're diving into a very detailed point-by-point critique. It's structured around 10 distinct areas of, a failure. And then we'll get into the highly charged debate from the fans who just refuse to let go of its iconic status.
So we have to cut through that fever-pitch crowd mania that came with its release.
We do. We need to see if the foundation, the actual filmmaking beneath that historical sheen is actually sound.
Let's do it.
Okay.
So we have to start with the most dramatic and I think maybe the most painful criticism. It's one that immediately frames this film as a massive artistic failure.
It's an extreme statement.
It's very extreme. The person behind this critique says they would rather sit down and watch Iron Monkey 2, which is a notoriously bad film,
it's terrible,
than endure Enter the Dragon again. That's fighting words.
It is. It's a statement designed to shock you. But it gets to the heart of what they call the opportunity cost, which is the central theme of this whole analysis.
What was that cost?
Bruce Lee was already deep into production on his second directorial feature, Game of Death. And this wasn't just another movie. It was an incredibly ambitious, highly personal project.
Right. This was his baby.
It was his philosophical statement. It was designed to showcase Jeet Kune Do against all these different fighting styles. And he made the fateful decision to put that personal work on hold to go make this Hollywood co-production.
And of course, because of his untimely death just weeks after the premiere, Game of Death was never completed. Not as he intended, anyway. We got that bastardized commercial version years later.
Precisely. The tragedy is just immense. So the critique frames the making of ETD not as a detour, but as a genuinely detrimental artistic decision.
How do they frame it?
They compare the choice postponing his masterwork for a studio-driven B picture to a hypothetical scenario. Imagine Jackie Chan mid-filming Police Story, one of the most creatively influential action films of all time.
A masterpiece.
Imagine him putting that on hold just to go off and make a mediocre, commercially safe film like The Spy Next Door.
Oh, wow.
When you frame it like that, the magnitude of the artistic loss, what we didn't get by not having the real Game of Death, it becomes really palpable. It's hard to reconcile that loss.
It really changes how you look at Enter the Dragon. You're not just watching a movie, you're watching the thing that might have robbed us of a work of genius.
That's the argument.
So if that's the artistic assessment, what other films from that exact same year, 1973, are these critics pointing to? Films that were structurally superior or just better to rewatch?
Well, they rattle off a list, and it's a list designed to show that the Hong Kong industry was already delivering better, more sophisticated action cinema on its own.
Okay, like what?
They mentioned 3 films they would happily watch on a loop before sitting through Enter the Dragon one more time: The Blood Brothers, When Taekwondo Strikes, and Knight Errant.
And what do those films represent artistically that ETD was missing?
They just represent a higher level of, internal Hong Kong craftsmanship. The Blood Brothers is a Shaw Brothers classic. It's known for its sophisticated narrative, its emotionally charged, complex action.
So better stories, better fights.
Better fights, better everything. This list is basically immediate proof that the technical skill, the quality of martial arts choreography available in Asian cinema that very year was already miles ahead of what Hollywood's involvement brought to the table with ETD.
So the genre didn't need Hollywood to legitimize the quality.
Not at all. It only needed Hollywood to legitimize the distribution.
That is a crucial distinction. Okay, so if we boil down the core artistic and structural flaws that the critics keep hammering on, what are the three big themes?
It always comes back to the same set of problems, and they're all directly related to those B-movie production standards. First, a plodding, slow pace.
Okay.
Second, an overlong runtime that feels padded with just unnecessary exposition. And third, what they just repeatedly dismiss as one-sided fight scenes.
So boring.
Fundamentally boring. The foundation of the overrated argument is that the movie just lacks authentic, nail-biting conflict and relies entirely on Lee's star power.
Let's follow that thread directly into the production itself. We have to talk about Robert Clouse.
Ah, yes, Robert Clouse.
The charge here is exceptionally severe, and it's aimed right at the studio. Warner Brothers committed, and I'm quoting here, an absolute crime by pairing an A-list, once-in-a-generation talent like Bruce Lee with a B-movie director like Clouse.
And it speaks volumes about the level of ambition, or really the lack of ambition, that Hollywood had for this project. They saw it as a genre picture.
An exploitation film.
Exactly. An exploitation film that just needed a cheap, reliable hand, not a visionary. They had one of the most charismatic, skilled physical actors in the world, and they assigned him to a director whose biggest claim to fame before this was directing an episode of the TV drama Ironside. That was his big credit. You look at the visionary directors emerging from Hollywood in the early 70s, Clouse wasn't even in that conversation. He was a utility man.
And unfortunately for him, his entire professional legacy is now just forever tied to Bruce Lee, for better or worse.
Irrevocably. It dictated the rest of his career. I mean, we have Clouse to thank for that eventual, commercially driven, and frankly terrible release of the spliced-together Game of Death.
Right.
And then later, he was the guy they hired to try and introduce Jackie Chan to American audiences with Battle Creek Brawl, which was a huge flop that completely misunderstood Jackie's genius.
He became the go-to guy for this stuff.
He became the go-to guy for martial arts exploitation. He directed cult B movies like Force, 5, and maybe most infamously, Jim Cotta.
Like Jim Cotta.
The point is, he was a director who consistently operated at a B-movie level. The fact that Enter the Dragon is his most famous work suggests that the movie itself never rose above that standard. Only Bruce Lee did.
Okay, there's a genuinely fascinating, almost bizarre detail about Clouse's health that critics suggest might explain some of the film's failings, particularly with the performances.
Right, the claim that he was deaf or hard of hearing.
Exactly.
And this detail provides some pretty significant context. While some in Hollywood just dismiss it as gossip, Clouse himself confirmed it. He struggled with severe hearing issues.
He admitted it.
In his own memoirs, yeah. He wrote that the chaotic street noise in Hong Kong nearly shattered the transistors in my hearing aids. And he confirmed he had an assistant on set whose entire job was just to confirm that the dialogue was being delivered correctly and clearly enough for him.
Wow. I had no idea.
And the critique argues that this condition offers a powerful explanation for the, and I'm quoting again, horrendous line delivery that so many cast members get away with.
Because the director literally can't hear them properly.
Right. If the director can't reliably hear the nuance or even the basic clarity of a line reading, the actors have much less accountability. It just points to a fundamental lack of directorial control over basic dramatic performance.
Which is exactly why the dialogue-heavy scenes, the ones without action, feel so stiff and, well, amateurish.
That's the theory.
That's huge. And it leads directly into the technical execution of the action itself, which is supposed to be the film's strength. The camera work, according to the sources, is a fundamental flaw.
It's a visual crime against Bruce Lee's art. The flaw is simple. Close filmed most of the fights way too close.
Too zoomed in.
Way too zoomed in, cropping off significant parts of the action, even in the widescreen prints. For Lee, whose whole style, Jeet Kune Do, was defined by rhythm, full body flow, dynamic footwork, This was just a massive disservice.
You lose the context of the movement.
You lose everything. His art was a full-body expression, almost a ballet of violence, and you need the camera pulled back so the audience can appreciate the complexity, the setup, the full sweep of the movements.
So if the camera's too close, you lose the rhythm, you lose the genius, and you're just left with the impact.
Exactly. You only see the punch land. You don't see the complex footwork that led to the punch. Lee's speed meant you needed a slightly wider shot and longer takes to truly appreciate the skill. These close-ups just turned his elegant fighting into a series of disconnected, often blurry flails.
And this flawed technical approach led directly into that huge editing controversy. The moment where Hong Kong clashed directly with the Hollywood style of cutting action.
This is maybe the most crucial piece of evidence for the B-movie argument. The Hong Kong crew, including the producer Andre Morgan, were reportedly just stunned, horrified when they saw the initial Hollywood cut.
Why?
They felt the American style of cutting action was just wrong for their genre. The Hollywood editing philosophy was all about quick cuts, you know, chopping the action every half second.
Which works for a Western brawl.
Right, it works for showing sudden, explosive impact. But it fundamentally obscures the execution and skill of martial arts.
So Hollywood was selling the result of the fight, but the Hong Kong crew knew the audience wanted to see the process.
That's the perfect way to put it. The quick cuts meant you couldn't actually see the mastery, you couldn't appreciate the sweep of the leg, or a sequence of 5 rapid-fire punches in one seamless burst.
So what did they do?
Morgan said they spent weeks in Hong Kong cutting the action back in, working with Bruce Lee and the editor, trying to reincorporate more of that martial arts flow, and then desperately sending these revised cuts back to Hollywood.
So the core action, the movie's only real selling point besides Lee's name, had to be saved in post-production by the Hong Kong side.
Because the Hollywood style just didn't understand how to film kung fu.
That is amazing. They literally had to fight to put the martial arts back into the martial arts movie.
That's what happened.
Given all this, that suggestion for an alternative director really starts to make a lot of sense.
It does. The suggestion was the boxer-turned-cinematographer James Wong Howe.
And the reasoning.
It was sound. Howe was revered in Hollywood, but he also had roots in Asia. He commanded respect in both industries. His involvement might have instantly elevated the entire production beyond that cheap exploitation flick status the studio seemed happy with.
Someone with his stature would have had the clout to insist on better camera work, a better editing philosophy.
And maybe even higher production values across the board. The fact that the studio didn't go for someone of Howe's caliber is seen as the clearest proof that they never intended Enter the Dragon to be a true cinematic event. It was just a quick cash grab.
Okay, this next section is where the argument shifts from technical failure to just outright squandered artistic opportunity.
The wasting of talent.
A whole roster of it.
Yeah.
The film took incredible martial arts talent and just completely wasted it in favor of less capable actors or, just poor plot decisions, all driven by Hollywood. Let's start with John Saxon, who plays Roper.
Saxon was there to be the familiar Western face for the audience. He was nearly 40. And look, he was a legit black belt in karate and had a role on the show Kung Fu, so he had some credentials.
But his presence is seen as a major detractor.
A huge one. The critique is that whenever Lee is off screen and we have to follow Saxon's storyline, the movie just collapses into uninspired and now terribly dated 70s kitsch. It just kills all the momentum.
And the most unforgivable sin, the one that makes purists absolutely furious, is that pivotal matchup. We were given Bolo Young versus John Saxon.
It's viewed as a cinematic travesty, an absolute travesty. The natural, electrifying confrontation everyone wanted was the little dragon, Bruce Lee, against the massive, intimidating physique of Bolo Young.
Of course.
Instead, we got Saxon, who, despite his background, had to be scripted as basically invincible himself. He doesn't take a single hit from Bolo. It requires so much suspension of disbelief that critics just call it laughable.
It undermines Bolo's character considerably.
It makes him look like a joke.
And wait, there's that crucial backstory about Roper's character integrity being compromised. That's a powerful indictment of the studio politics at play, isn't it?
It's a huge indictment. Roper was originally scripted to die. It was a necessary dramatic device to escalate the danger, motivate the other characters.
Look, he doesn't.
Because John Saxon, as a working Hollywood actor, successfully lobbied to have the script changed so his character would survive, so he'd be available for sequels.
And that decision led to Jim Kelly's character, Williams, dying instead.
Exactly. So the character's integrity was sacrificed entirely on the altar of actor ego and Hollywood's obsession with sequel potential. They wanted Roper to live not for the story, but for potential future box office returns.
And you mentioned Robert Conrad was also considered for that role. Why does that matter?
Because Conrad, who is also a known TV star, might have actually been willing to die for the sake of the story's integrity. The fact that a star was able to compromise the narrative to save his own character just shows you where the Hollywood crew's priorities were.
They saw it as a John Saxon vehicle.
In part, yes. Not as a tight, focused story for Bruce Lee.
Okay, let's move on to the muscle himself, Bolo Yeung. Yang says. He became instantly immortalized by this film. The name Bolo stuck with him for his entire career. But critics argue his genuine talents were just completely wasted.
He was reduced to a caricature, really. Bolo was just there to flex his massive muscles, snarl, and throw smaller guys around. His final defeat is widely considered insufferable.
An anticlimax.
A massive anticlimax. He doesn't lose to Lee's superior skill. He loses to a cheap bite on the leg and a debilitating kick in the balls. It just squandered this phenomenal opportunity for a true skill-on-skill showdown that the film desperately needed.
And Bolo had that amazing, unique, signature style that could have really elevated the climax, right?
He did. He was famous for his so-called no-looking kung fu style, where he was proficient at fighting without actually looking at his opponent. He'd often be facing the camera while dealing with attacks from the side.
It would have added some much-needed variety.
It would have provided desperately needed variety and spectacle, yeah. It could have prevented that final confrontation from just devolving into a clumsy chase in a mirror maze.
I have to challenge that a little, though. If Bolo had used that style in the mirror maze, wouldn't it have looked like a comedy bit? The movie was already struggling with its tone.
That's a fair counterpoint, and it's exactly what many defenders argue. They claim that if he'd used that overtly theatrical style, the finale would have looked comedic, which Lee was clearly trying to avoid.
He's going for realism.
Or his version of it, yes. But the critique stands that even if the no-look style was too much, the eventual fight was so poorly conceived, the biting, the mirror smashing, that it failed dramatically anyway. The absence of a genuinely challenging final fight is a failure of imagination, no matter the style.
Let's talk about the action choreography. The absence of Sammo Hung's wider influence is seen as a huge detriment. He's in the opening fight.
Which everyone agrees is possibly the best choreographed sequence in the entire movie.
It's fantastic.
Sammo's appearance as Lee's sparring partner is explosive. It's technically brilliant. It showcases both of their skills perfectly. But by 1973, Sammo already had over 10 choreography credits. He was rapidly developing that distinctive, dynamic style that would define Hong Kong cinema.
And the rest of the movie suffered without that touch.
Severely. We're left with Bruce Lee, the self-choreographer, just repeatedly decimating opponents with minimal effort, which leads to these lackluster, repetitive fights whenever he's not directly involved.
So was Lee's own choreography the problem when it came to staging fights for other people?
According to the critique, yes. Lee's strength was choreographing himself. His signature style, incredibly fast, minimal contact, all about evasion and speed. It rarely translated well when he was choreographing others who had different, more traditional styles.
So the non-Lee fights look weak.
They look unconvincing. The film feels like a one-man army showcase with absolutely no sense of danger because no one else looks convincingly skilled.
But we have to acknowledge Sammo was still very early in his career then. Critics today have the benefit of hindsight of seeing his 80s masterpieces.
That's the key context. We are judging a 1973 production by the standards Sammo himself set later. And look, he did perform some uncredited stunt coordination on ETD, but his fully realized choreographic genius was still embryonic.
Still, the film needed an expert hand to elevate the non-Lee action.
And the Hollywood director and fight coordinator failed to provide it. The overall fight quality just dips dramatically the moment Lee steps away from the camera.
Finally, in this section, we have to talk about Angela Mao, a massive star. She was hot off these phenomenal leading roles in Lady Whirlwind and Hapkido. She had the intensity, the charisma. She should have been a major force in this.
And she's barely there. Her talent was criminally wasted. She gets, a pitiful few minutes of screen time, and she's immediately reduced to the most cliché of tropes.
The damsel in distress.
Little more than a damsel in distress. She's beaten, assaulted, and it only serves to motivate Lee's revenge. It's a clear example of Hollywood failing to utilize, or maybe even understand, the talent they had.
But I've heard passionate fans defend that brief appearance. They argue those few minutes are iconic in their own right.
They do, and it's a fascinating defense. These fans argue that her short scene where she fights off an entire gang using ruthless street tactics like kicking them in the groin and scratching their eyes was actually one of the greatest few minutes of her entire career.
So it showed off her skills perfectly, even in a small role.
It showed off her brutal, effective fighting style, even though the role was only written as a flashback to justify Lee's journey. It's a testament to her power that even in a tiny subservient role, she still managed to steal the show. And for those keeping score, she teamed up with George Lazenby, the other fellow James Bond, the next year in a spy film called Stoner.
Ah, that's a great detail.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move past the casting and direction and look at the film's central conceit, the combat itself. Critique point 5 is blunt and, it completely undermines any sense of dramatic tension. Bruce Lee is invincible, and that is a major detractor.
It creates a tremendous vacuum of tension, which is just fatal in an action film. The argument is simple. If you're one of those people who complain that Steven Seagal never gets hit in his movies, you absolutely have to look at Enter the Dragon.
It's the same problem.
It is. That iconic line Lee uses, "Boards don't hit back," well, apparently that also applied to almost all of his human opponents. They're little more than sentient punching bags.
He just moves through the tournament like a god, completely untouchable. The only damage he takes, even in that final mirror fight, is purely cosmetic. It's just designed to look cool.
Exactly. The damage is nothing more than those aesthetically pleasing scratches. They're designed for spectacle and visual intensity, not to make him look bruised or genuinely hurt or vulnerable. It's pure eye candy.
I did find that small detail about the only moment someone actually gets close to landing a proper hold on him.
Right. The only person who manages to get close to Lee and land a significant move is Bob Wall, who grabs his leg. And if you really want to get into the technical minutia, even that was actually performed by a stunt double.
You're kidding.
It was Yuen Wah, the future director, doubling for Wall in that specific moment. This tiny detail just reinforces how untouchable Lee was written to be.
The major counter-argument, though, is that Lee himself was striving for a form of realism where he would be untouchable, given his skill level.
And fans who defend this argue exactly that. They say Litton is trying to portray realistic combat, and for a master of Jeet Kune Do, anything less than quick, surgical decimation of his opponents would have been unrealistic.
But realistic doesn't always equal good cinema.
Critics would say it makes for profoundly boring cinema. And this tendency toward invincibility, it's there in his other films too. Look at Fist of Fury. He only suffers a single slash on his chest at the very end. He's dominant the entire time.
Okay, next point. Critique number 6 focuses on the villains, calling them completely unintimidating, which again just kills the drama. Let's start with Bob Wall's character, O'Hara, the film's mid-boss.
After the electric intensity of the Chuck Norris fight in Way of the Dragon, Lee understandably tried to recreate that energy by bringing in another accomplished karate champion, Bob Wall.
And it failed.
It failed spectacularly. There is never, ever any doubt that Lee is going to quickly dismantle him. The fight has no tension. Wall has to resort to the cheap tactic of smashing a bottle. And Lee just dispatches him. Bob Wall himself still gives interviews today where he admits how lame that fight scene really was.
But the main villain, Sekkin as Han, is seen as the greatest disappointment of all. Here's this legendary, intimidating Hong Kong villain. And in ETD, he's 60 years old and completely defanged.
He's reduced to an absolute cinematic cliche, a lame Asian hybrid of Dr. No and Blofeld from the Bond franchise. You know, the isolated mastermind on an island lair.
With the cat and everything.
Han is he completely misses the mark. He had this extensive, terrifying kung fu repertoire, and it was completely unused. He spends the final minutes just running around a hall of mirrors, flailing. It's a role anyone could have played.
It's another tragedy of wasted talent, just like Bolo and Mao.
Precisely. And critics point out that Sekkin showed incredibly impressive fighting moves years later. In 1985's Hong Kong Godfather, proving he still had the chops. Yet in ETD, he's one of the least threatening villains in the history of cinema. The final showdown is remembered for the location, not the fight. And that's a massive storytelling failure.
Critique point 7 hits on the James Bond ripoff element. The influence feels, aggressively shoehorned in, making the film seem dated even when it came out.
It's an issue of genre confusion. It feels like the filmmakers weren't confident enough to rely on pure tournament action, so they layered on all these tired secret agent tropes.
The spy shenanigans.
Exactly. You get Jeffrey Weeks as a poor man's M, a deeply confusing plot about a rogue Shaolin student and an opium smuggling ring. It just felt forced and cheap. And it came out the same year as Roger Moore's Bond debut, so the kitsch factor was already really obvious.
And critics suggested that if they wanted an Asian 007, they should have just looked at Jimmy Wang Yu in Asia Pole from 1967.
The consensus is that they should have just stuck to the tournament, the revenge, and the martial arts. But, in a surprising counterpoint, one passionate fan absolutely loves this aspect.
Right.
Argues that ETD is actually the best Bond movie of the entire decade, precisely because it wholeheartedly embraces that specific 70s kitsch and exploitation aesthetic.
That's a take. But I think for most critics, the final nail in the coffin is critique point 8. It's just boring. The pacing is flawed. There's too much padding.
The film clocks in at just under 100 minutes, but the sources argue it is at least 15 minutes too long. It just suffers from unnecessary filler, arguably because it needed to conform to a standard Hollywood runtime.
And the plot should have been elegantly simple.
Exactly. Lee avenges his sister's death in a deadly tournament. Then chaos ensues. That's the movie.
Instead, we get all that spy nonsense.
We get the nonsense about him being a hired secret agent from Shaolin, John Saxon's uninspired backstory with gambling debts, and Jim Kelly acting like he's starring in a completely different blaxploitation movie. All of this exposition just bogs down the central action.
Makes the film feel heavy and slow.
And the action itself, as we touched on earlier, suffers from a specific stylistic choice that contributes to that slow feeling.
The slow motion.
The excessive use of slow motion scenes. For an actor like Bruce Lee, who was famous for his near superhuman speed, slowing him down with arbitrary slow-mo is considered an artistic crime. It just robs the action of its natural, dazzling rhythm.
It adds to that feeling of padding and a frustratingly slow pace.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established a very, very strong case against the structural and artistic quality of Enter the Dragon. Now we have to bridge that gap. Why does the legacy endure? Why is it so beloved, despite all these acknowledged flaws?
This is the core of the debate.
So let's start with the historical perspective from those who saw the film when it came out in 1973.
And for those viewers, particularly in the West, this film was nothing short of a cultural seismic shock. You have to put yourself in their shoes.
Okay.
The atmosphere in the theaters wasn't just excited, it was described as electric and supercharged. It sustained a genuine fever-pitch crowd mania.
Yeah.
For high schoolers, Bruce Lee was instantly our Star Wars, a completely new, mesmerizing form of kinetic storytelling they had never seen before.
So the lack of quality is completely offset by the novelty and the charisma.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the Hollywood gloss, even if it was B-grade Hollywood, it made the film look polished compared to the raw, cheaply dubbed martial arts films they were usually exposed to.
And the distribution advantage is probably the most critical argument for its lasting status, right?
Sure.
This is where context just completely overshadows quality.
It's everything. Its landmark status isn't just about Lee's genius, it's about Anglo-American cultural hegemony and media distribution. Because ETD was a Hollywood co-production with white co-stars like John Saxon, it guaranteed unprecedented global exposure.
And the argument is that even a C-grade Hollywood film will outdo an A-grade foreign film worldwide.
In terms of eyeballs and box office, absolutely.
So the argument is stark. Enter the Dragon's global impact is purely about market access and being in the right place at the right time, not necessarily artistic merit.
That is the core takeaway for the detractors. The film earned its unshakable place in history by establishing the martial arts genre on a truly global basis. It grossed over $400 million lifetime. But that success doesn't inherently make it a well-directed, well-written, or well-paced piece of cinema. It's an artifact of history that transcended its own flaws.
Now let's look at the modern retrospective, the quality POV, the perspective of martial arts fans who have access to this wealth of films today. Many looking back over 40 years later agree the critique holds up.
The consensus among the purists is that it's almost impossible to argue against the structural flaws today because we just have so many superior examples. They argue that Enter the Dragon is now obsolete when compared to films that came before and immediately after.
What are the comparisons they make?
They'll point to classic Shaw Brothers films, which still hold up technically, or to modern masterclasses in action filmmaking, like The Prodigal Son from 1981, with its hyperspeed Wing Chun, or even the contemporary The Raid series, known for its visceral brutality.
Films that delivered on the promise that ETD made.
Exactly. They provided everything ETD promised, but in their view, failed to deliver.
Which brings us back to that most reductive yet potent argument from the anti-ETD crowd. What is the film without its irreplaceable star?
And the summary is chillingly effective. If you take Bruce Lee's searing charisma and magnetic presence out of the equation, what you are left with is objectively a cheap exploitation flick by a hack director.
So the film is nothing more than a vehicle.
A highly polished, hugely successful vehicle for Lee's star power. And its structure, its direction, its narrative, they just stand up poorly under scrutiny.
And finally, this whole debate extends to Bruce Lee's other works, right? His entire short filmography generates these incredibly passionate, conflicting opinions among fans.
The preferences are highly instructive. Many critics firmly prefer Fist of Fury over Enter the Dragon. They argue the director, Lo Wei, understood how to utilize Lee and build dramatic tension far better than Robert Klaus did.
Even with a lower production value.
Even with that. And Way of the Dragon is also highly divisive. Some fans find the comedy scenes just painful, and they view the Coliseum fight with Chuck Norris as lame in the extreme.
While others consider it his masterpiece.
His true masterpiece, yeah. Because it was his first venture into full directorial control. It was his specific vision with no Hollywood interference.
And the ultimate testament to how fundamentally flawed some fans find ETD is that they actually prefer the 1978 version of Game of Death.
The one infamously completed with stand-ins and body doubles and cardboard cutouts of Bruce Lee's face.
That one, they prefer that over Enter the Dragon.
Well, and that truly emphasizes the level of artistic dissatisfaction with ETD's structure. The critique ultimately boils down to a profound sense of wasted potential. They just wish that Lee had used his enormous clout to create a technically superior story-driven film rather than settling for this kitschy B-movie co-production. His final global statement should have been more profound.
So what does this all mean? We see the duality in sharp, clear relief. On one hand, Enter the Dragon is a fundamentally flawed film. It suffers from B-movie direction, criminally wasted co-stars, an invincible protagonist who kills all dramatic tension, and, dated James Bond plot devices.
But on the other hand, those structural and artistic flaws are utterly eclipsed by its monumental cultural importance. Lee's searing charisma, combined with that groundbreaking distribution from the Hollywood co-production, made it an absolute cinematic event. It didn't just succeed, it permanently changed martial arts cinema history and propelled the entire genre onto the world stage.
Which guarantees it a spot in the pantheon, regardless of its quality.
Right.
Before we leave you, there is one last interesting ambiguity around the quality control of the film itself, which speaks to this whole debate about artistic compromise. Did Bruce Lee even see the final version that became this global phenomenon?
It's an enduring mystery. The producer, Fred Weintraub, claimed in his book that Lee tragically never saw the final cut of the film.
Wow.
But others on the production side claimed he watched the dailies and loved the energy. And we know for a fact that the Hong Kong crew, including Andre Morgan, spent weeks in the cutting rooms with Bruce Lee, trying desperately to adjust the editing, sending cuts back and forth.
Because they knew the Hollywood style was wrong for the action.
Exactly. There was clearly an understanding and a heavy negotiation to try and secure the best version possible, attempting to blend two completely different filmmaking philosophies. But whether Lee gave his final absolute sign-off on the complete version, that remains shrouded in ambiguity.
And that leaves us with a provocative final thought for you to chew on. It brings us right back to that original lost artistic vision. Bruce Lee's original partially filmed concept for Game of Death involved him facing genuinely challenging opponents, forcing him to adapt to completely different fighting styles as he climbed a tower.
Which is the direct opposite of his invincible role in Enter the Dragon.
The direct opposite. So, had Lee lived and achieved global superstardom through the release of ETD, would Hollywood have simply pushed him to keep making these simplistic, invincible hero movies that pleased Western audiences, relying on spectacle over substance? Or would his own artistic desire, his desire to choreograph complex, challenging, and even vulnerable fights, like the ones he envisioned for Game of Death, have ultimately won out? Something for you to ponder.